What if I told you that Syria, yes, the same war-torn nation we hear about on the news, is actually one of the most biblically significant lands in history? And what if I told you that the ancestors of modern Syrians played a direct role in shaping the destiny of Israel, and possibly even the fate of America? Most people have no idea that Syria isn't just another Middle Eastern country. It's one of the oldest civilizations in human history, with deep biblical roots. But here's where things get even more shocking. The ancient Arameans, the true ancestors of the Syrian people, are mentioned all over the Bible. And guess what? The patriarch Jacob, the very man whose name became Israel, was called an Aramean in Deuteronomy 26:5. This means that Syria and Israel are far more connected than anyone realizes. And that connection doesn't just belong to the past. It has huge implications for the future, because understanding Syria's biblical past might unlock shocking revelations about today's world, perhaps even clues to biblical prophecy and modern geopolitical struggles. So buckle up, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at Syria or the Bible the same way again. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our deep dive biblical revelations. When most Americans today hear Syria, their minds immediately jump to conflict, terrorism, and the chaos depicted nightly on CNN or Fox News. But beneath that modern facade lies a forgotten history, a history deliberately obscured, but powerful enough to reshape the way we understand biblical prophecy and our own spiritual identity. The Syrians of today are descendants not of Arabs, but of the ancient Arameans, a Semitic people whose story begins over 4,000 years ago. This isn't just a footnote in history. It's a revelation hiding in plain sight. The Arameans gave humanity the Aramaic language, the very language Jesus Christ himself spoke. Imagine that. Every word Jesus uttered, every miracle he performed, was expressed through Aramaic, a language developed by the ancestors of modern-day Syrians. Why then has history quietly minimized the significance of this remarkable culture? Aram, their biblical patriarch, was none other than the grandson of Noah, a direct descendant from Shem, whose lineage led straight to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In fact, Scripture openly declares Jacob, later known as Israel, as a wandering Aramean, Deuteronomy 26:5. Consider the explosive implication. The Israelites and Syrians aren't distant strangers, they're ancient blood relatives. Could this suppressed truth explain centuries of tension and rivalry? Has something deeper, perhaps even spiritual, been fueling their perpetual hostility? Historically, the Arameans were no ordinary tribe. They wielded exceptional influence in the ancient world, skilled warriors and cunning diplomats. They blended into neighboring civilizations, from Babylon to Egypt, subtly influencing entire empires. But their greatest legacy wasn't military power. It was the language they gave humanity. Aramaic wasn't just another dialect. It was the lingua franca of the ancient Near East, the original language of biblical texts, prayers, and prophetic utterances. Yet today, their descendants have become nearly invisible, dismissed casually as Arabs, their ancient heritage forgotten. This strategic historical omission begs deeper questions. Why were the Arameans erased from popular consciousness? Was it just historical accident, or is there something far more intentional at play? Consider America's involvement in Syria today. Major political figures, from Barack Obama and Donald Trump to current leaders, frame their actions as strategic necessity. But beneath geopolitical strategies might lie spiritual anxieties. Could the perpetual destabilization of Syria represent subconscious recognition among powerful elites that acknowledging Syria's true heritage would force humanity to reconsider deeply held spiritual and prophetic narratives? Even Hollywood, America's cultural megaphone, subtly contributes to this erasure. It portrays Syria only through lenses of war, terrorism, or chaos. Rarely, if ever, does mainstream American media explore Syria's profound biblical heritage. Is this just ignorance or intentional suppression? Could powerful interests subconsciously understand that acknowledging the Arameans' true significance might ignite spiritual awakening, forcing humanity into prophetic accountability? Even powerful American religious institutions, megachurches led by Joel Osteen, T.D. Jakes, or Franklin Graham, often avoid discussing Syria's biblical roots openly. Their silence isn't coincidental. It hints at deeper anxieties about confronting suppressed historical truths, capable of unsettling established spiritual narratives. Ultimately, recognizing the Arameans as a vital part of biblical history doesn't merely add historical depth. It compels us to confront uncomfortable truths. Syria and Israel, ancient cousins, today stand locked in bitter rivalry. This tension isn't simply political, it's profoundly spiritual, perhaps even prophetic. Could ancient prophetic identities, deliberately suppressed, now resurface powerfully, forcing humanity into spiritual reckoning? Maybe the modern world's intentional ignorance about the Arameans isn't accidental. It's strategic, designed specifically to prevent spiritual awakening at a moment when global deception intensifies prophetically. If that's true, then rediscovering Syria's forgotten biblical heritage doesn't merely rewrite history, it prophetically shapes humanity's spiritual destiny, revealing suppressed identities, holding powerful spiritual keys. Could acknowledging Syria's true Aramean heritage disrupt the spiritual deception prophetically warned about? If so, what else has history deliberately hidden from us? If you carefully observe global news today, you'll notice one country repeatedly dominating headlines, constantly at the heart of geopolitical turmoil: Syria. On the surface, it's easy to dismiss Syria as simply another Middle Eastern conflict zone. But look deeper. This isn't merely a geopolitical chessboard. Syria carries profound spiritual significance, rooted deeply in biblical prophecy, especially in a scenario involving Israel, America, and global powers. The relentless obsession with Syria is neither accidental nor purely political. Historically, this land, once home to the powerful Aramean civilization, was central to numerous biblical narratives. Abraham's family came from here. Jacob himself was labeled an Aramean. King David famously clashed with its rulers. This isn't ancient trivia. It hints at a deeper spiritual significance, still resonating today. Why would powerful ancient empires, from Rome to Babylon, and now modern nations like America and Russia, continuously gravitate toward this same small stretch of land? Perhaps Syria holds a hidden spiritual importance, carefully overlooked by mainstream media, but intuitively sensed by world leaders. Consider America's intense involvement, from Obama's red line on chemical weapons to Trump's abrupt withdrawal to Biden's ambiguous policy stance. Syria remains an obsession. Why? Strategically, Syria offers little economically, yet America, Russia, and Iran expend significant resources, soldiers, and diplomatic energy over it. Could this relentless fixation hint at something deeper, something spiritual and prophetic, something embedded in America's subconscious awareness, that Syria's fate is prophetically tied to global events? The constant clashes between Israel and Syria today eerily mirror ancient biblical conflicts. Scripture explicitly described tense relationships between the Israelites and Arameans thousands of years ago, conflicts continuing spiritually even now. Modern-day Syria and Israel repeatedly engage militarily, with Damascus and Jerusalem seemingly locked in endless conflict. Could today's geopolitical tensions represent ancient prophetic identities resurfacing, symbolizing deeper spiritual battles explicitly foretold biblically. What about Russia's intense presence? Vladimir Putin's relentless support for the Syrian regime isn't merely about geopolitical influence or Mediterranean ports. Perhaps Russia intuitively recognizes Syria's spiritual significance prophetically. Russia, openly opposing American interests, might sense prophetically something America refuses to acknowledge, that controlling Syria spiritually symbolizes prophetic power. Even Iran's involvement prophetically aligns with biblical prophecy. Iran openly aligns with Syria against Israel, precisely fulfilling prophetic warnings, describing spiritual battles surrounding Israel. Could today's seemingly secular geopolitical alliances actually reflect deeper prophetic spiritual alignments described in Scripture? And why does America consistently portray involvement in Syria as necessary for stability? Could America subconsciously sense Syria's prophetic significance, justifying perpetual involvement, without publicly acknowledging Syria's spiritual importance? America's influential political leaders consistently frame Syria's conflict as a strategic necessity. They claim to be protecting democracy or defending national interests. But could influential American politicians like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, or Donald Trump intuitively sense deeper prophetic significance in Syria? Do they subconsciously recognize Syria symbolically represents a prophetic battleground described in Scripture? If you've ever watched the nightly news in America, you've undoubtedly seen the name Damascus repeatedly flash across your screen, often accompanied by scenes of explosions, smoke-filled skies, and chaos. But Damascus isn't just another war-torn city in the Middle East. It carries a haunting prophetic significance, deeply embedded in biblical scripture. Isaiah 17:1 speaks chillingly of a day when Damascus, the oldest continuously inhabited city on earth, will become a ruinous heap, completely destroyed. Now ask yourself, why is this prophecy suddenly resonating so powerfully with the events unfolding right now? Today, Damascus isn't just another city caught in regional conflict. It's become a flashpoint of global tension, repeatedly making headlines on CNN, Fox News, and in White House press briefings. The United States, Russia, Israel, and Iran, all powerful global players, have vested interests in what happens within Syria's ancient capital. Why such fixation on Damascus, a city without major global economic significance? Could it be because something far deeper, more spiritual, is at play? Consider recent events. Repeated Israeli airstrikes targeting Damascus. America, closely allied with Israel, rarely condemns these strikes, instead quietly offering diplomatic cover. Politicians from Barack Obama to Donald Trump and Joe Biden have all cautiously sidestepped direct engagement, yet strategically maintained America's influential role. Why this subtle American complicity? Could powerful figures subconsciously recognize a deeper prophetic significance behind Israel's persistent strikes on Damascus? Something biblical and profoundly unsettling? Moreover, the current escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, with Damascus caught in the crossfire, seems precisely like the kind of tension biblical prophets warned about. Hezbollah, supported by Syria and Iran, openly positions itself against Israel, and Damascus remains central to their power dynamics. Mainstream American media carefully frames these tensions purely politically, yet beneath these geopolitical explanations could lie profound spiritual anxieties. If Damascus truly becomes the ruinous heap Isaiah vividly predicted, the implications for global stability, especially spiritually, would be enormous. Influential American figures understand this, even if unconsciously. Why else would the US government invest heavily in military operations across Syria? a region seemingly less strategic economically compared to oil-rich neighbors. Why do influential media figures like Tucker Carlson, Anderson Cooper, or Rachel Maddow carefully avoid discussing biblical implications of Damascus's repeated targeting? Could they knowingly or unknowingly sense something spiritually unsettling unfolding, something prophetically dangerous enough to justify careful avoidance? Hollywood, America's influential entertainment hub, rarely explores Damascus explicitly, yet movies and television subtly condition audiences globally to perceive Middle Eastern conflicts superficially, ignoring deeper spiritual and prophetic significance. Could influential entertainment platforms subconsciously contribute prophetically by avoiding discussions explicitly, exploring prophetic scenarios involving Damascus? Why does Hollywood eagerly depict apocalyptic themes, yet rarely touch on real-world biblical prophecy, playing out in real time? Think about it. We've seen endless Hollywood films about the end of the world, global war, and mysterious disasters. But when was the last time a major blockbuster explored Isaiah 17, or the idea that Damascus could be wiped off the map? In our lifetime? If Damascus truly falls, what comes next? Who fills the power vacuum? Russia, Iran, China, or does the collapse of Damascus trigger an even bigger conflict? One that pulls America even deeper into a prophetic storm. Many biblical scholars argue that the destruction of Damascus could be a key signal of end-time prophecy. If true, that means what we're seeing today isn't just politics or war, it's biblical fulfillment. So, here's the real question. Are we ready for what happens next? Syria, a land drenched in ancient blood, sacred texts and power struggles that have lasted for millennia. But why should the modern American care about an age-old conflict in the Middle East? Because history repeats itself, and America might be walking straight into a prophetic storm. If you want to understand America's potential fate, look no further than ancient Israel. The Israelites relied on foreign alliances, often turning to the Arameans, modern-day Syria, for military and political support. Sounds familiar? Ancient Israel placed its trust in foreign powers rather than God and faced judgment. America has inserted itself into Middle Eastern affairs for decades. Are we repeating the same cycle? Empires from Rome to Britain have fallen after overextending themselves in foreign conflicts. Is the US next? Consider this. Every empire that meddled in the Middle East eventually collapsed. Babylon rose to power, conquered Israel, and then was utterly destroyed. Persia dominated the region but fell to Greece. Rome controlled the land but crumbled from within. The British Empire once ruled over the Middle East, but lost its global dominance after World War II. Now America has spent decades trying to manage the Middle East. Could this be our turning point? Many biblical scholars believe that Syria plays a major role in end-time events. Isaiah 17:1 foretells the destruction of Damascus, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Jesus himself spoke of wars and rumors of wars in the last days, Matthew 24:6. Revelation describes a global conflict that centers around the Middle East, a war so devastating that it shakes the nations. Look at today's headlines. The US still has military bases in Syria, even after attempts to pull out. Russia and Iran are strengthening their grip in the region. Israel continues airstrikes on Iranian targets inside Syria. Turkey, a NATO ally, is clashing with US-backed Kurdish forces. Now imagine this: one wrong move, one unexpected event, and suddenly Syria becomes the spark for a war that pulls the US into a biblical-scale conflict. History doesn't just warn, it shouts. Rome believed it was invincible until it stretched itself too thin in foreign wars. The British Empire thought it could control the Middle East, until World War II drained its power. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, lost, and crumbled within a decade. Now, America has been involved in Syria for years. We've funded rebels. We've conducted airstrikes. We've stationed troops. We've made alliances that shift like desert sand. Are we about to pay the price? Just like every empire before us? Let's recap. Syria's origins trace back to Aram, son of Shem, making its people direct descendants of a biblical patriarch. The Arameans played a massive role in shaping Israel's history, sometimes as allies, sometimes as enemies. Their influence wasn't just political or military, it was deeply spiritual. Even today, we see remnants of their impact. The language Jesus spoke, Aramaic, came from them. Yet somehow their identity has been erased from mainstream historical narratives. Why? And more importantly, who benefits from keeping their story hidden?